Well, and like I was watching clips of Kamala Harris online, and I came across this clip where one of the interviewers asked her about her mother and her mother passing away. She passed away from cancer. And it's the only time I've actually seen her cry. Like, and I was like, I know that they train them, right?
Not right. Do not.
To never
especially
do that.
because of the stereotypes as a woman. You
especially
cannot,
as a woman.
You cannot.
Yeah.
And I think that's bad advice, but it is the how we society we live in.
It's bad advice. It's horrible advice.
Yeah.
But it's also what I've learned as I've become like older and more mature and more just like worldly, is that I have to learn how to separate like what is just like shitty advice and what does it take to get something done.
Yep.
And in order for her to get what she wants to get done, she has to project a certain image, and it sucks.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's a ridiculous I hope that we're going away from that as the Tim Walson.
I was just about to say that was the thing. That like what I've seen so many different memes on that, but that is so powerful because I've seen one of them was you as a parent, you could only hope that your child has that much pride in you. As Gus Walls has in his dad. And then the other one was, what does it say about, what a strong message about the household that Tim and Gwen raised so that 17-year-old is okay with, that version of masculinity, which should be like, it is this ridiculous belief that you gotta be tough and you gotta be hard and all of that ridiculous. And I just saw Tyrese the other day. I don't know if you've seen on that show where he said black men cry. Like that we shouldn't. And even in that, he couldn't
did something there. I think he did something there.
I think so too. But even in that, he couldn't let that go. When they offered him tissue, I don't want tissue.
Yeah,
it's okay. Like you need, and that's what Charlotte Perry was saying. Like you need tissue. Like you snotting all over the place. You're like,
on my mic, can you like not? But I thought I haven't watched that full interview, but I thought that for all the things about all the times I disagree with Tyrese, which is a lot.
That's a lot. Yep, I get it.
I appreciated him for doing that. And I have been like on that journey too of like, of all the things that I disagree with right now, even with the Democratic Party, I appreciated how there was sort of at the DNC, there seemed to be like this through line of like women and the legacy of women and how they shape our lives, and also this through line about like men being able to see power to women in a way that we haven't seen before, like having Doug Emhoff on.
Absolutely, to be right.
Even just there were other like, I mean, the whole thing, honestly, like they're up there championing for a woman to be president,
right?
And again, I have lots of things that I wish were different. And I hope to become different over the long term, but I do recognize that was really powerful and is sort of like the kind of sentiment that I think the party should be setting, that like this is a party where we're going to do that.
Absolutely.
And it set like this really stark contrast between like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party.
Absolutely. The ridiculous, and when we define toxic masculinity and the pushback, especially from those who are, this idea, that crying is I watched, what's his name? Tony, I forget his last name, but he did documentary. His company was doing a documentary on trans women, Black trans women. This was a couple of years ago, last year or sometime. But one of the things the story he told was that I think he's got like a 6-year-old, at the time he had like a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, or maybe it was an 8-year-old daughter and 6-year-old son, whatever. But his son was younger than his daughter, and his daughter would, if his daughter fell or hurt herself, whatever, he was like, "Oh, come here," and would take care of her. And he said the exact same thing would happen to his son, and he was like, don't cry. And he said he had to realize, pain is pain. Right. Like, why are
and
you
everybody has it.
Exactly. Why are you training this kid not to acknowledge the physical pain that he's feeling? Like, you cry when you hurt.
Well, because that's how you turn just like what I think, let's just say at base level masculinity is, and turn it into something that is really harmful.
Right. It becomes the belittling of women. Women cry, violence. Men don't. Exactly. Yeah, it leads exactly to that. Women are weak, men are strong, because men don't cry, women do. It is the exact thing that leads to violence against women because of the mindset, and it starts that young.
Well, that's how we get some of these figureheads in politics who are just really obsessed with. Nina Turner did a whole
I saw some of it.
That I'm sure she pissed a lot of people off, but I think that she had some valid points within that conversation. But before we get too far down the road, we haven't even told all the people who we're talking about. Or who I'm here with. Today we have a really special guest. This is your second time
This is my second time.
And we've worked together a few times doing different things because you're all over the community doing a lot of amazing things. But we have Raphael here to talk to us. I think you gave us our first viral video when you did the video about voting on the August election last year.
I didn't know that was the first viral one.
It was, I think people saw your handsome face and they were like,
they didn't run.
They didn't run. They were like, let me watch this all the way through. And then they listened to what you were talking about, because that's how social media works. People see what they think is a shiny thing, and they say, "Let me stop and look at it." So I think that's what happened. I think it was the locks. Maybe.
I appreciate it. I'm glad to hear that. I didn't know that, but I am very, very glad to hear that.
Yeah, it was. We had a few thousand views.
Good deal.
On that. And we did what we needed to do.
We did.
And people showed up because that was the point, right? Like, getting people engaged. Like, Absolutely. Of course, like, we all have our views on what we want people to do. However, I'm always happy when folks show up and get engaged. So you were helping us with that work. And you're coming here today wearing one of your hats, which is the Black Men's Voting Collective.
Right. Exactly. I appreciate that. I'll say one more thing on the masculinity. I think that was one of the things that probably one of the reasons I was on last time was this idea that women's reproductive rights is a women's issue.
Right.
No, it is not. I mean, it is a women's issue because because it's talking about, women's autonomy, but it is absolutely a men's issue too.
And it's about everyone's autonomy.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's about birthing people's autonomy. It's
Absolutely.
about, men have a absolute dog in the fight, right? Like, it's about your autonomy too.
Think about dads and husbands who go, and they did that a lot at the convention that you were mentioning about what dads and husbands go through when you have, because of that whole narrative, and I don't want to get us too far off track because it's not here, but the whole narrative of, people just willy-nilly voluntarily decide to go, have an abortion. It's ludicrous on its face, and the idea that there aren't husbands and fathers and men involved in those women's lives who are equally as impacted. And I think that's one of the things that show, sure, I always say, from my perspective, men should have zero to say about reproductive rights because as the memes are going around now, they're like, well, Kamala Harris has never had a kid and neither has any of the previous 46 presidents. So what's the point?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
But that, I do believe that is one of the things I hope, it's probably one of the things that motivates me right now is because this feels different. And I keep saying that. That's what I'm saying to everyone. This feels different this time. And it feels even different for me from the 08 and 12 elections with Barack Obama. This feels different. And it's not about Kamala Harris's gender. It feels like we have been suffocating for a long time. And finally, not that we're not breathing yet, but finally, it's like you are underwater and you can actually see the breakthrough. Like if I can just get there, I can actually get a grasp, a breath of air. And that's what it feels like. It feels like this is more than just about it. And I really appreciate that she did not in any way mention her gender in her acceptance speech. I think that was phenomenal because she's like, my job isn't going to have anything to do with my gender. These are the things that we have to do. And this is what we have to, where what we need to do. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Her not saying, this is going to be historic. It is. Everybody knows that. But that's not her point. Her point is, I was in the room when putting together the 50-nation coalition to help fight back against Russia for Ukraine. That's the role I had.
Right.
I was the tiebreak on,
Well,
on
she has to show competency in a way that Donald Trump has not had to show competency. And so I think the whole thing was kind of for me like a lesson in strategy in a lot of ways. Like, how did y'all put that together that fast?
I am still amazed.
Because I wonder if it was totally different from what they had planned for Joe Biden. I'm guessing that in a lot of ways it had to be. Like the vibes. Oh no, my necklace came off. It's all right, y'all. Anyways, the vibes were just different. They have two different vibes. So
my strong suspicion is that it was nothing. Because frankly, Joe Biden, I'm not in the rooms with them, but I'm a this part of the reason I'm here. I'm a political junkie. I'm a nerd. I pay attention to these things. Joe Biden, I have yet to meet, not just Joe Biden, I have yet to meet the politician anywhere that will voluntarily cede power. Not a one of them. That is just not in the general DNA of a politician. Yeah. And so I don't believe you hear the rumors that Speaker Emerita Pelosi is the one who she had the closest relationship to him to say, bruh, after that debate, you cannot do this if you are being true to what you are saying. And he has. I do believe he will go down as the most consequential president in my lifetime for sure. Now, I don't know.
I think that too.
The amount of actual takeaway, everything else, just the legislative work that they were able to get done is incredible.
Yeah. And I think that his legacy too, just based off that one decision.
Absolutely.
I think that obviously Joe Biden sees America through a different lens than I do. And I think that he truly is like, I love this shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I got to do. You know what I mean? Like, I got to do what I got to do to make sure that we are protected and democracy is protected. Now, do I think at points his pride, obviously, because they kicked the can down the road for a real long time. But I do think that at his core, that he really believes very strongly in the opportunities that America has to be better.
Absolutely. More perfect union. He really does believe that.
Yeah. And I think that if you're looking at it from my lens, it's we still have such a long way to go to really fulfill those ideals. But I think it says something about a person who's willing to, it's particularly a politician, like perhaps a regular person would have just thrown in the towel earlier, but like you said, like a politician,
it's what they live. I mean, and I don't mean that necessarily. He's
dedicated his whole career.
He was 29. He was just barely old enough to be elected to the Senate, just barely old enough to be able to do that. And he spent the last 50 years. I can't imagine spending, I'm on my third career. I can't imagine doing that.
He's been through a lot of shit.
He has.
He's been through a lot.
And I think that gives him perspective. Losing his first wife and his daughter. Child. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Losing cancer.
Right. Then exactly. Those are all things that give an individual a different perspective. And I believe that's when he sat down at his core of core and thought about, when he talks about, like he said in his speech, I love this job, but I love this country more. That is like, I have yet to, and including Barack Obama, I love Barack Obama, but there hasn't been another president that I think merits.
It wasn't Clinton.
Oh, don't get me started on
you know
Slick,
what I mean?
Slick Willie.
when we think about just like I said, I appreciate, there's a lot of things I don't appreciate.
Sure.
I don't appreciate Gaza. I don't appreciate a lot of things, but I do appreciate that he was like, I'm gonna just go ahead and bow out and allow the country a chance to have someone be able to do this job better than I'll be able to do it.
And the thing is, we see it we've seen it in every single president, at least I have. And I think anyone who pays attention, you've seen this. The presidency ages the individual. Look at every single picture. They go from that first inauguration to when they're walking out. Look at how it aged Barack Obama. Look at how it aged Bill Clinton, George W. Bush. Look at how it aged them. And the thing is, Biden started off already old. There's no reason that it wouldn't have aged him more. And I think that's the real distinction between him and Donald Trump. The presidency didn't really, I do believe Donald Trump has age-related mental decline right now. He's almost 80. And I'm just going to say this, as being closer and Bill Clinton is the first person I ever heard say this, and I believe it, having more, I have more yesterdays than tomorrows. That's just a physical, that's just an understanding. But there's no way, I think Donald Trump he's not a serious person, and he wasn't a serious, so he didn't have the weight. He's not up
there thinking that hard.
No,
it's his people.
Exactly. He didn't have the usual weights of the president because he wasn't thinking about that.
Exactly.
Joe Biden was. And so when you start off at 72, so by the time you get, or higher vote, it was 70, I don't know how old he was, but by the time you get there, that.
And Donald Trump hasn't had to pay a bill in his life.
No,
it's also like just the regular stressors of being a regular American, right? Like
no clue.
And the stressors that people endure, that come along with money, right? That you don't have enough of anything.
Right.
I know plenty of people who are very wealthy who live to be, 90, 100. You can't tell me that part of that is that you just don't have the weathering that people have when they have to endure poverty and all of the stressors that come along with that. Right. And so my position is also that, yes, he may live 15 more years, but it's because he has not had to deal with all of the death. I know Joe Biden grew up as a middle class person, right, in a working class family. All of the things that happened up until that point that he has not been affected by. So when folks talk about the differences between them, or the differences between Trump and any of the other candidates that he's facing, there is a stark difference in his upbringing. And I think that it does matter.
Absolutely, it matters. My mom would tell me stories. My mom was 78 years old when she passed. She would tell stories when she was 12 in Texas of she and her siblings having to pack, 100-pound bales of cotton. What 12-year-old does that? But not only did they do it, they did it for years. You're not going to tell me that didn't impact her later years. That you can't say that didn't have an impact. And that's the point. It is the regular stressor of life. Donald J. Trump was born into wealth. And unlike many others who appreciate that. And even if they don't, sometimes you can't blame them to a certain extent. You can't blame them. You can't say, well, let's take all your wealth away so you understand what it is to live so that you can do it. But he never made any effort to do anything other than, I grew up in the 80s. I'm a product of the 80s and the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Like that's all he ever knew, and discriminating overtly against Black people.
Right.
Him
whether it's
and
housing
his daddy.
discrimination, whether it's the full page ad.
So they never had,
I'm sure he probably, I don't know if they've ever checked his employment roles, but I'm sure he didn't hire Black people to work within his companies.
Or not visible. He had to.
Or not visible.
I guarantee you at Trump Tower and all those other places.
In the service sector.
They're all in the service, but nope, not the concierge,
not in the administration.
not the folks at the front desk. Never that. And that's a distinguishing factor. And that's why I think so, it's hard for, I think the difficulty for Joe Biden was just he's smart enough to recognize, I do believe I don't think he's lost enough of his mental acuity to not be able to do the job, but to think if this is where he is at 3.5 years, adding another 4 years on top of that is just, I think that's more than any, it's just a human thing. You can't.
And then we're going to be stuck with J.D. Vance making the decisions, and
we will not. We're gonna move on to other topics. Don't get me started on. You're gonna get me in all kind of troubles if I have to talk about.
I have to bring you back on the Columbus Can't Wait After Dark.
Yeah, there we go. We can do that for sure.
Talking now, but today we're here to talk about something that is super important. It is the Supreme Court races that are happening in Ohio this year, right? And I think that what always happens during presidential election year is that everybody focuses on the presidential election. We just talked about it for 20 minutes. However, the reason why this show exists is because the things that you actually feel very much in your everyday life is local politics. Now,
absolutely.
That's at the level of the people that we see every day, the people that we might go out and see at a restaurant, folks from city council, folks from the school board, but that's also the people who are like more widely, legislating the entire city or the entire state. I'm sorry. And that is one of those groups is the Ohio Supreme Court. Again, we talk a lot about the big Supreme Court, like the federal Supreme Court. And I think that sometimes folks miss that there is an Ohio Supreme Court and they do have races and they are very much consequential to our everyday lives. And so I want you to, I'm going to just kind of sit back and let you, I'm going to ask a couple questions, but my goal for this is for you to really educate folks on what's upcoming. But first, I want to start with like I mentioned, we've heard a lot recently, especially about the federal Supreme Court, right? But what does the Ohio Supreme Court do?
So we will start there, and then I'm gonna, me in my meandering way. So I'll reel you in. I'll come back. But very analogous to the United States Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court is the final arbiter of any disagreement in the state of Ohio. So when you think about, you hear, oftentimes you may hear that a case went to, and I think it's easier, so I don't I try to keep my lawyer hat off so I can kind of explain. But if you think about it from a real baseline level, if you go from the fact that, I'll use a civil case, for example, when I was doing civil rights work, if I filed a case against a landlord for discriminating against a Black family, in the filed a state claim, because you can do both a federal claim and a state claim.
Right.
But since we're talking about the state of Ohio, I'll file that claim here. So the first thing, the first court that I get to would be, a court of common pleas. People have heard of those. Those. That's where, if you have, a relative or, someone who, has unfortunately had, interaction with the criminal legal system, that's the common plea. So that's where at judge. And here's my first meander. To be very clear, common pleas judges are elected as well.
Right.
And we have to be aware of the judges. You cannot, I had somebody tell me earlier this year, well, when I don't know, I just look and try to look at the name and figure out the name. And I'm just like, you cannot be serious. And I mean that. But those judges are elected.
Affect your life.
Judges impact your life.
And the lives of your family.
In more ways than you can imagine. The Ohio Supreme Court, though, so then you start that case at the Court of Common Pleas, and say I won that case there.
Okay.
But the state, whoever, the landlord that I sued, appeal. And so they appealed it to here in Central Ohio. It would be, or in Ohio, Columbus would be to the 10th district. So that's the appellate court. So that's the mid court. So you start at the lower court, you go to the appellate court, and then say that court overturns.
Appellate court is an appeal.
An appellate court is just that. It is where you file an appeal. And I'm not going to take you through a law school lesson here, but the difference between what's called a court of first impression, that lower court, is that's where you're debating the facts, where you're saying, I did this, I didn't do that, that happened, that didn't happen. We do discovery, we have all this stuff. When you get to the appellate court, they're not worried about that. The record is already established at the lower court. What they are saying was there a procedural error by the court, and you have what can be abuse of discretion by the judge, meaning that the judge has very broad, discretionary, decisions where they can make overruling an objection or sustaining an objection or whatever. They are very, very broad. So that's where you get into abuse of discretion. You get violations, that there is a misapplication of law or something like that. That's what happens at the appellate level. So say, so we're there. I won at the lower court. Landlord appeals court overturns the lower court and says, nah, he doesn't win, he loses. Then we would appeal to the Ohio Supreme Court. Okay. The Ohio Supreme Court is the top court in the state of Ohio.
So you're saying there's like let's in general, there are two layers that you go through before you get to the Ohio Supreme Court. Correct. And then if you get to the Ohio Supreme Court and they tell you something that you don't agree with, that's it. That's it. So you can't go to...
it depends on...
It depends on the case,
speaking, right? It depends on what the nature of the case is.
Right, okay.
But for the most part, if it's and again, not to make it too complicated, but you have state laws and then federal laws. And of course, we live in a republic where federal laws are superior to state laws. So some things there's no way to do it. But most times, if it's a state court, if it's a state claim,
it's going to stop
like it goes to the highest court in the state. And that's frankly why, and that's by design. And that's actually a good idea because it keeps, we don't want to live where, at least most of us don't want to live.
Everybody can go. Yeah. Yeah. Nothing would ever be resolved.
Right.
If
But you don't want the federal government we don't need the federal government trying to decide things that happen, in Linden. That's just like depending on what's happening, right? That's not where you want that. You don't need that. So that's why it stopped, right? It stops at the Ohio Supreme Court. And so the Ohio Supreme Court, again, just like the lower courts in most state courts, I don't know very many. I know there are a couple of different processes that have been in place. But for the most part, the state court judges, and that means from common pleas, municipal court, all the way up, are all elected judges. So that is so you think about it, kind of our earlier discussion of just about politics in general. That's what happens. It's political. Mm-hmm. And so when you don't have politics if you don't have sides and factions and parties and all of those things. But when you're talking about judges who are supposed to be neutral, they are supposed to come at it from a perspective of what does the law say and how do we carry out the law? That's really what their role is. Even if they have a partisan perspective on a particular issue, this is why judges are supposed to be elevated above that. Now, that's a little truer at the federal level, which is, frankly, the example I gave you is one that was very rare for me. I always file my cases in federal court. Yes, state court judges it made it so much more difficult. It's just, there's a little bit of a difference there. Now, there are a lot of really, really good, competent, state court judges. Mm-hmm. And I will say, for the most part, most of them do follow the law. But you have to think we're in, one of the C's. We're in Columbus, so we're in the, metropolitan area. There's just a different feel. When you get out into a rural area and you have, a judge, it's not necessarily different from the sensibilities of that community, but there may be more leaning one way or the other when you get out there. But at the Supreme Court level, you would expect that those judges are capable, and that's what distinguishes a judge. Again, here's my second meander. I will tell you. I went to law school with the anticipation of being a federal judge. That's what I wanted to do. That's where I originally wanted to, put all of my energies. My second year of law school, my third year, I don't even remember, it was second or third year of law school, I had an opportunity to do an externship with Judge Algernon Marbley, who was absolutely the first Black Chief Justice here in the federal circuit. He was appointed by Bill Clinton. And that semester was the most enlightening of my life, and it truly made me move away from wanting to be a judge because I learned what I figured out, and this is true. Judges are supposed to be neutrals. Mm-hmm. They are not supposed to come with a viewpoint. They are supposed to be, that's part of the
You're supposed to put the facts in front of them.
That's part of what's going on at the federal level with our current Supreme Court, is because it is clear on many, many instances, they are not being neutral. No. They are not being nonpartisan. And I can say that with
the
clarity.
Reporting says that.
It is just clear they're not doing that. But after that semester working with Judge Marbley, what I saw, and Judge Marbley had a lot of conversations with him. He is a phenomenal human being, and I am so grateful for having the opportunity to learn under him. Yeah. But I won't go into all of the details, but there was a case where it was the most difficult case. It was a drug trafficking case where two women one was younger, one was older. One had a kid, had just had a child in prison. She had just given birth to a child in prison, and the question was, she was undocumented, and she was going to be, because of that, upon her release, was going to be immediately deported. Okay. And so the question, as she came from Mexico, this is when the cartels were really bad. And so the question that we stood around for 3 hours, and everybody, including Judge Marbley, myself, the translator, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, people who were watching in tears, because the only decision was, do I let this woman stay with her newborn child in prison here? And the kid was out. I mean, I think the kid was out in California. That's where she came from. Whatever. That's where she had a kid. Do I let her stay in jail here, knowing that as soon as she's deported, which would have been in like a year or so the kid wouldn't have even been walking, that she's going to lose the child? Or do I allow her to be deported right back to the community that she came in, where the cartel are, where she is assured to be killed? What do you do? Yeah. What do you do? And that's what we spent 3 hours. It was the most heart-wrenching. After that, it was the most heart-wrenching conversation. And I watched Judge Marbley agonize over trying to figure that out. And I was like,
no, thank you.
Not for me. And the other part of that was the turning point for me. But the other part of that, just watching him, getting an opportunity to know him and, understand he's got a viewpoint. He certainly has a viewpoint. But to watch him, in moments where I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I would do this other thing, to watch him stay right down the middle. Which is what you want to do. And I was like,
not for me.
I am not a neutral.
You're not.
I'm an advocate. I have a viewpoint, and I'm pushing my viewpoint.
Same.
I am trying to convince you, persuade you to come with me and go this way.
So
I
you
am not trying to stay down
that
there.
You weren't built for that particular thing.
Exactly.
But there are people who are built to do that. And unfortunately, there are too many people who are actually they have a viewpoint.
Who are me, but a judge.
Who are you, but didn't make the decision to say, actually, no, this is not for me, because I will not be able to do this job the way that it's meant to be done.
Right. So getting us back on track. So the Ohio Supreme Court has 7 justices. And up until 2 years ago. So, and this is where I think we talked, a bit. I will have to get over. So we have our state, by statistics, not just me, and you can look them up, is I think it was in the top 3 states for gerrymandered states.
Right.
In the United States. Mm-hmm. We are gerrymandered.
We're in the top 10, I know for sure.
It's
and we're
higher than
up
that.
There.
It's high. I want to say top 5. Ohio is always given as the example of a gerrymander state. Mm-hmm. And because of that, and I forget what sparked it, but our very gerrymandered legislature, General Assembly, recognized that when judges, because of this everything we're talking about, judges don't put their party affiliation, even if you know what their party affiliation is, and even if when they're not in their robes and when they're in their private lives, they may be attending fundraisers or doing whatever, perfectly fine, because they're politicians too. I mean, that's what they do. But the distinction was always that judges didn't have their party affiliation there. But when you are in a gerrymander state, and I do hope we have time to talk about that,
because you're going to have to also break down
to
listeners what gerrymandering is.
When you're in a gerrymandered state, and that gerrymandered state has created a gerrymandered supermajority in the Statehouse, there are no boundaries, there are no parameters. And I tell you, to our earlier conversations, I don't agree with everything either party does. But I firmly believe in our democracy, in our American form of democracy. And our American form of democracy requires 2 parties. And that's where we get our best ideas. When partisans like me are on one side pushing and partisans are on the other side, that's where we find kind of that middle ground where we go. But when you have a gerrymandered state legislature where there's no parameters, then you just do whatever. And so one of the things they did was, after they very similar to the federal Supreme Court, just threw precedent out the window. And never before had judges had their party affiliation included by their name on the ballot. Why? Because they are supposed to be neutrals, not partisans. And if they had, and so people who are partisans,
but they knew they could get more votes in a state like Ohio,
in a state that's gerrymandered. Right, exactly.
Right,
so
they have that
what
party
do?
Affiliation.
Let's put the party affiliation there. So we now have D's and R's behind the justices' names. And so people who vote, who are not even, doing no research, had no idea. I see an R, I'm voting for an R. And that's what happens. And so that changed the sensibilities of the Ohio Supreme Court. And to kind of get to, we'll talk again, we'll talk about gerrymandering, but where we are today, the reason this is important, on the ballot on November 5th, our three justices are up. So the current split, so now that everybody's got their party affiliation behind their name, which is a way to put a thumb on the scale. That's exactly what they were doing, to put a thumb on the scale. The split, and we would know this. We really would know this even without the party affiliations. You know who they are. But the voter, the average voter, the people who aren't watching Columbus Can't Wait, the people who aren't really paying attention, the people who hear the day before election, oh, it's election, they just run in, who aren't there, they can just go hit those R's. The split currently is a 4-3 split between the conservatives and liberals, for lack of a better term, Republicans and Democrats, however you want to put it. With a 1-vote majority for the Republicans. There are 3 seats that are currently up, including one of the Democrats. And so if all 3 of those seats go to the conservatives, the Ohio Supreme Court will switch from a 4-3 split, which kind of keeps things balanced. Right. In fact, that's pretty indicative of what the state is. The state, we are a purple state that leans right. We are not we're not California or Massachusetts or any of these really, blue states. We will never be a blue state, but we are a pretty much 50-50 state. But what will happen is the Supreme Court will go from a 4-3 split to a 6-1 split.
And so when you say that it'll go to a 6-1 split, what sort of issues will something like that affect with the everyday person?
As we were talking about, anything that rises to the Supreme Court will then have we can only hope, but history being kind of an indicator of where things are, the likelihood that you're going to have people who are conservative by nature give any real thought and balance to anything that goes against their and let's be clear too, the level of partisanship where we are currently is off the charts compared to what it was even 10 years ago. So even partisans have become more partisan, especially because they are emboldened by the fact that we are.
So for instance, I think that when folks who voted yes for issue 1 last year, right, think, we're in the clear. Like, we don't need to do anything else. But if there is a 6-1 split in the Supreme Court, what types of things?
I'm going to give you a really good example because it's one of the things we were just in court the other day, which is probably in fact, it is going to end up at the Supreme Court. So with issue 1 with reproductive rights last year, it was a 14-point win. So that means it wasn't just Democrats. There's a lot of people who made it very clear. But what does that mean? Because the language of issue 1 did exactly what we wanted it to do, which was enshrine abortion rights. But all of those laws that were put on the books over the last 10 years,
the 24-hour waiting periods,
listen to the heartbeat, the unbelievably ridiculous statements that are not medically driven that a doctor must say to a woman or a person before they have an abortion. All of those things, none of those things automatically fell away. What happened was we said, yes, there is a right in the state of Ohio to reproductive care. Now, what does that look like? How do we work that out? And we were just in court on the 24-hour waiting ban, and actually we have a win. But that's going to go to the Supreme Court, and it's not going to get there. It's not going to get there before November. So that means by the time this gets there, if things don't work out the way they should, we will have a 6-1 split for people who already favor stifling reproductive rights. And so they're going to say, no, it is because the research that has gone into, there is zero reason for a 24-hour waiting period. What they're trying to do was they were trying to make it as hard as possible to make it as burden. Can you imagine somebody who, we only have a few abortion care places in the state. So you have to drive 2 or 3 hours from, some part of to get here. And then, so what do you have to do?
It will hurt poor and working class people the most, because they will not be able to take time off of their jobs or whatever else they're having, childcare and all of those things. And so that's a really good baseline example, bottom line example of what will happen if the Supreme Court flips from a 4-3 split, where you have the opportunity at least to, have some balance, to a 6-1, where the chances of the person, that Democrat that's in the minority, ever being able to, convince another 3, conservative justices to rule in favor won't happen. And so when we talk about it, and this actually leads into what we're talking about. So when we think about issue 1 and reproductive rights, that's probably one of the most important things that we talk about. But this year, the best example, and gets us into gerrymandering. And I'll explain that because the language that's on the ballot right now in November, we have a gerrymandering ballot initiative that will be on a measure that's on the ballot in November. And but this is not the first time. We had a gerrymandering issue on the ballot in 2015. We had a gerrymandering issue on the ballot in 2018. Both of those issues were overwhelmingly supported by the vast majority of people in the state of Ohio. So the question may come up, well, why do we have it on there again? It's back Tell us.
Because the Supreme Court decided not to enforce the language of those ballot initiatives.
And were there was a certain partisan part of the Supreme Court who decided not to enforce it.
Now, here's the best example I can give you. Former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor is a Republican.
They're pissed at her.
Oh, you know why? There you go. So let's start. The reason they're angry with her is because when she was Chief Justice, she continually voted with the Democrats specifically on gerrymandering.
Yeah, to uphold democracy.
Yes, that we actually need, if you believe in democracy, we actually need a system that respects democracy, not that you have power. Again,
we can't bend the system to what we want it to do. We have to uphold democracy and respect what the people want.
If you actually are an adherent to democracy, if you are a partisan who wants to hold power, then you do what the others were doing. And that's why they were upset with I think it was 6 or 7 times. The Supreme Court said, no, you are not following the law. Go back and redraw the maps. And we can get in, if you want to talk about that, we can do it. Say, go back and redraw the maps. And what did the legislature do? Because they had the supermajority, they just waited. The time is always important. And they knew if they just lollygagged and dragged their feet, and that eventually there's going to come a point, a November election, which was last year, where it becomes a moot point, because you have to, at some point, you have to be able to tell those who are seeking office who their constituents are. Right. And if you don't have that in place, at some point it's going to get cut off. And they knew that. They absolutely knew that. So when I think the first, one of the first times that the Supreme Court turned down the maps was, I'm going to say something like April or May. But they didn't decide, and this is, dealing with the General Assembly, they didn't decide to take it up, I want to say, until the last week of September. And then all of a sudden it's this hair on fire rush because we're trying to get it in. And I'm like, of course not. And they know that that's what's going to happen. So the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, impacts everything. So this year, while we have gerrymandering, and we're going to do that again, if we pass, which frankly, I think there is a strong likelihood that this gerrymandering issue that's on the ballot will be successful. It doesn't matter, though, if the interpretation of it has to go through a partisan Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court is 6-1. So we've gone through all of this, but I want to make sure that people understand what gerrymandering actually is and why it's messed up.
Sure.
It's how it disenfranchises people.
So it absolutely does. So
Black and brown people.
So gerrymandering is not new. It's been around. The legislature it was named after was Jerry way back in, I don't know when. I'm not going to go through all of the history, but essentially, if you are aware on any level of how voting happens, when you go to your polling place, you vote for your state representative. Your state representative is responsible for the community that you live in. So you, as a Columbus resident, should not have a representative who lives in Cuyahoga County. How can someone in Cuyahoga County give you know what's going on or what's needed in Columbus? And yet, the way that those lines are drawn, the legislative lines are drawn, and it's most important, and I'm going to make this point because I think it's really important. The congressional lines, the maps don't only impact the state election. So not just your state senator and your state representative. It also impacts who we send to Washington, D.C. as our U.S. representative. And so that's where people wonder why Jim Jordan down in Southwest Ohio has been where he is for so long, because he's in a gerrymandered district that literally draws out the Democrats and draws in the Republicans, so that every time he goes through a primary or goes to be elected, he's only talking to Republicans. Right. He doesn't have to consider the other side. He doesn't have to engage in actual democracy, where he, as the elected representative or the individual who's choosing to run for office, has to convince you why you should vote for him. It's completely turned on its head. And he's like, I'm the Republican, and so I will choose the people who I want to be in my district. And so that's what gerrymandering is. Gerrymandering is, so let me
choosing
say
the people that
there are two. So there are two very, and I will only hit this point because I think it's important. There are two types of gerrymandering. There's partisan gerrymandering and there's racial gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering is still against the federal law. You cannot, at least it was. I'll tell you the current, and I'm saying this as I'm saying it. I just remembered the U.S. Supreme Court has essentially came out with a ruling this last time that says, because there was a case out of South Carolina,
right?
We don't really know, because racial and political, they're so closely tied. How can we know that one was racial and not political? Which is very clear. It is very clear what those are. So racial gerrymandering is still illegal. We still can, under the United States Constitution, we still cannot make determinations about voting based on race. However, partisan political gerrymandering is perfectly fine. And it is. And it makes sense if you think about it, if you understand democracy. Yeah, that's fine. The people in power get to draw the maps. They get to be the ones that are kind of setting things up. And of course, as we talked about earlier, politicians are drawn to power.
Right.
That's the only thing that's speaking. When you talk about, sometimes you think about, let's hit a corporation where it hurts, hit him in the pocketbook. For politicians, where you hit them is power. That's what they want. They covet the ability to be in control and to have everything going on. Okay.
Well, and so racial gerrymandering is illegal based on the U.S. Constitution. However, how stratified our political affiliations are, they just sneak it in there by drawing people out.
Yeah, well, it's not even a sneak. What happens? So there are two concepts here. It's all competitive or compact districts, and so part of the reason racial gerrymandering is not allowed, is that's what was happening, where they call them packing and cracking them. If you put, which is true across all urban areas, primarily you have people of color congregate in urban areas.
Right.
So here's the idea. So if you only until years ago, the Voting Rights Act said people of color should have the opportunity to elect to Congress people who look like them, who might understand their perspective, so that became one of the ways that we said we have to be able to allow people who have traditionally for 400 years been disenfranchised. We give them an opportunity to be enfranchised, to say, Tareya, you understand the plight of Black folks better than anybody else, and certainly better than someone who's not here. So we're going to make sure that this district is there. So, but that has been now put kind of on steroids, because what happens is we say, okay, we're going, when I was talking about drawing those lines, when they do, there was, and I will tell you, I forget I don't know the exact district, but it went from Delaware County to Athens County.
Makes no sense.
There is no way.
I went to school in Athens.
There's just no
two different cultures.
There is no way what's going on in Delaware. But what's unique about those two? Yeah. What's unique about those two? You have rural white people, Delaware County is a very conservative area, and so. But what's in between there?
Right.
You have some urban areas there. So what do? Draw the line around the urban areas where you're going to have more participation by people of color, or not even just people of color. This whole urban-rural divide. There are different concerns if you are a rural person compared to being a city person. And now some of those things they have actual, you can't have high-speed internet in the rural.
Common sense.
Right, exactly. These are things that are different.
You just mentioned broadband.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's how it is. So the reason gerrymandering has become so prevalent and so much of a problem more recently than in the past. In the past, they would literally go, in fact, I think in our last lawsuit, the last lawsuit that the ACLU had, there's actually evidence, what they call the war room. They were sitting in the room with the maps, trying to figure out what's the best way to draw these lines so that we put all of the urban people. So it takes away the voting power. So if you are drawing, you had districts that split literal streets. One side of the street was in one district. The other side of the street was in a different district. Like, how does that make any sense? But what they were trying to do is you put as many of the people you don't want to vote for you in that one area. So that's all that's going to be there. And what happens is that you don't have them in the other. So there's not a mix of people where the politician would have to appeal both to you and to the other people, because you're in these lines. And that's one of the things that is addressed, I think, in the current ballot measure is, a lot of the map drawing in general is what this current gerrymandering ballot is about. It's just about taking it out of the hands of the politicians, because politicians will not ever do the right thing when it comes to who's going to put them in power or take them out of power. And to his credit, Governor DeWine actually came out publicly and said politicians shouldn't be doing this. He is not supporting the ballot measure, but he does say that there's got to be a different way, because that's what happened. Politicians will never do the right thing. And so that's why this is so important when going back to the Supreme Court and how the makeup of the Supreme Court. So even if this gerrymandering issue passes, it's still how it's interpreted. And that's what the Supreme Court does. It says, what is the law? How it is interpreted still has to go through those 7 people. And those 7 people have to be the ones to understand it. And we talked about former Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. She aged out. Yeah. And that's the reason otherwise she'd still be there and they'd still be really upset with her. But when she aged out, I forget what the age is of judges in general. In the state of Ohio has a age limit on, when you can be a judge. And so that's one of the reasons that she had
that she's no longer
that she's no longer there, but she's still very much advocating.
Right.
She is very much advocating for this because it is fundamental to our democracy. And that to me is, again, I go back to it. I believe, I don't believe in coincidence. I believe our forefathers, for all of their racism and slaveholding and misogyny and all of the things that were prevalent in, in the 18th and 19th century, the system that they came up with it's amazing that it has endured as long as it has in the form that it has. And frankly, in the last couple of years, it's been, you talk about tested to the point of breaking. It just been, it didn't break. But if you believe in that, because that's what democracy means, self-governing. That's the difference between communism and Marxism and all these other things. When it is the government, you don't have any autonomy. You don't get to self-rule. You don't get to make a decision that marijuana is going to be legal in Ohio. You don't get to make a decision that abortions are going. The government does that for you. But who wants that? We are all able to govern ourselves. And that's what democracy is. But when you don't, when your viewpoint, the ideal in that is that if your viewpoint doesn't prevail, then you accept the will of the people and you move on. You fight harder next time. You get a bigger coalition next time. You gather more people and then you bring it back again. And that's generally how it works. That's how democracy works. But it's been flipped on its head by gerrymandering because it's not the will of the people. It's literally politicians drawing these lines so that they don't have any competition. And if they don't have competition, then they don't have to have ideas. Tell me the last, and this is rhetorical. Tell me the last idea that Jim Jordan came up with. Watch his congressional hearings. What legislation has he proposed?
He's just in that seat.
It just hit nothing. And so because he's there to do what he's doing, which is just, be a partisan hack. And when he's in the majority, so he gets to be a committee chair. And so he gets to do those things. And I use him because he is the most egregious example. But there are examples across the country, across Ohio, of individuals who are just like that. And let me be very, very clear about this too. This is not a Republican and conservative problem only. Democrats have done the exact same thing and gotten the exact same pushback. Maryland is the best example of that. They had a Democratic supermajority in their House of Representatives, and they were gerrymandering to again. Power. That's where they are. So this is a bipartisan,
it's a bipartisan issue. But the point is that the people should be able to decide these things, and it should not be in the hands of politicians. Exactly. And manipulating those maps and interests of power and self-interest of their party.
Right. So the measure, just to kind of close the loop on that, the measure that's on the ballot in November, that's one of the things. What they've decided to do, I won't go into it because it's not really complicated, to be honest. What it is instead of currently it's the ballot board, which is a whole different conversation we can have about our very, very partisan and very, very political Secretary of State right now, who is just
Frankie.
What a pathetic loser. What a sad loser. And just not even his own party, like nobody takes him seriously. And so what does he do? He is absolutely taking advantage of his position and his power. And that's exactly it. But anyway, not
my favorite.
Exactly. I definitely digress there. But ballot board, which is part of where, kind of where like I said, it's not really complicated, but it's kind of the situation. But they are the ones that essentially, kind of help make these decisions. But what will happen under this proposal that's on the November ballot is replacing politicians, because there's appointed, like I forget, the governor appoints somebody, and it's Secretary of State. I think the lieutenant, I forget all who is currently there, but getting all elected politicians, so removing them from the process completely. There's a process for appointing 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents, and they are going to a board. And there is a very detailed process for determining that these individuals, like, you can't be a lobbyist, they're like, and you can't have been a lobbyist, like I think it's a 10-year, it's a long time. Like, you can't be a lobbyist, you can't be affiliated with a party, you can't be like on a political party committee. There's like the Democratic committee, Republican.
So they're looking for actual individuals
to draw the maps. And this is what I started to say a moment ago. The reason it has gotten as, to the place that it is now is because of technology. Now, there are computer programs that will run millions of options at a time in fractions of a second, that will tell you, they will give you thousands of options of how to gerrymander and so right now, what we have experienced for the last 10 years in Ohio, this is where I think it's insidious. This is where I get angry. This is where my advocacy really comes up, because it is an insidious plan. But when you gerrymander, what happens is, just like reproductive rights last year won by 14 points, you're not going to tell me that wasn't the case all along. But what happens is, if you are someone who is not steeped in this stuff like we are, you hear, like you say, every 4 years or every whatever, go vote. And you're like, oh, I want, abortion sounds good, I'm going to vote for that. And then after election day, it didn't win. Wait a minute. Why is this happening? Or I'm asking my legislators. And so what happens, there's the electorate not only becomes suppressed, which is, the part that the partisans are doing, but it becomes depressed. Because how many times does an individual, when you hear people say, why vote? It doesn't matter.
It's because they voted.
It's because they voted and they haven't seen anything change, but they don't understand you haven't seen anything change because the system is literally set up not to change. And so,
or to change it when a certain party is in power and wants.
Right.
Yeah.
So with these algorithms, these algorithms kick out 100,000 different scenarios where, if you do it, you will always and right now, that's what's going on with us, with our U.S. with the state of Ohio, our U.S. congressional districts, our representatives, as well as the state districts, they are set up right now. Again, Ohio is a purple state. It's a 50-50 state. Well, not really 50-50, 51-49, however you want to put it. And it does lean to right. So you would think I think we have 16 congressional seats are apportioned based on population. We are bleeding population, like hemorrhaging population, because young people are leaving because we've had, a gerrymandered legislature that says, why would you want to be here if you're going to
abortion ban?
You're going to take
Yeah, exactly. It's the same reason why. That's not the only reason, but a lot of younger people are progressives, and they're seeing certain legislatures that just doesn't align with.
What young family wants to move to Ohio from somewhere? Now, granted, we do, because we are the Midwest. So, you think about, high tax states like California or some other places, but nobody wants to move when they have that. But part of that is it's baked into the system. And so I think it's, like I said, I think it's 16. I think we have 16 representatives, and it should be, a split of that should be 8-6 or, whatever, however that, a couple of seat difference, but it's lopsided now where there is no way every single time, every election has happened for the last decade, 12 Republicans win. No matter what.
Right. That's the reason why people feel, like you said, the vote becomes depressed, because people feel like it's no reason for me to even interact or engage with this, because nothing is going to be different.
Right.
So when people are going out to vote, to make the decision to go vote, what should they be looking for, like on the ballot, when they're looking for this particular issue?
So, here's the deal. And I'm going to tell, it's issue 1. Yeah, it's issue one. And I will tell you again, the only politician, even more so than the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general, who is probably one of the most partisan people that I know of. But Secretary of State Frank LaRose is a disgrace to democracy. And I say that in every single way, because he is the one who's in charge. So the way this issue right now, it's about to go to court again, because again, without going into all of the details, because it is, it kind of gets, in the weeds. I love it, but if most people probably don't want to. But the bottom line is, it is Frank LaRose and his staff. So when a ballot measure, you have probably done, in fact, right, everybody, you know, people walk up to you and say, sign a petition. You read the language. Maybe most times you read the language. The language is very clear of what it says. Now, the way in a nonpartisan, when you have someone who actually cares about democracy and who actually cares about their job, unlike Frank LaRose, they take that language and that becomes the language that goes onto the ballot, but not Frank LaRose. What does Frank LaRose do? He does the same thing he did with issue 1 last year with the reproductive rights, and twist the language as so far that it is unrecognizable.
It wasn't the intent.
If you go in and you read it. The ballot issue last year, the reproductive rights information was one paragraph. By the time he finished doing the thing, it had turned into a whole page. It went to the next page because he's doing all of these things to twist the language.
And so people be like, I ain't reading that.
Right, exactly. So to your point, that's what I would hope the folks who are listening to this conversation would understand. Don't worry about it, because he's done the same thing with the gerrymandering ballot. In fact, that's why they're going to court. I heard a pundit, and I'm not sure who was, say he has and this was a Republican who said this. He said he has twisted the gerrymandering language for this ballot measure that 700,000 people signed. So much that it's, in fact, the idea behind the ballot measure is to end gerrymandering. But if you read the ballot language the way he's put it, it looks like it's requiring gerrymandering. That's how bad it is. So don't read the ballot language, whatever it is. Understand the issue. Voting yes on issue 1 means you are trying to end gerrymandering. And that's, whether there are debates about, whether this commission works right. There are other ways to do it. There are a lot of different conversations out there about it.
I guess my question is are there models in other states where this commission has been successful?
Yes. Michigan is probably the best example of where this model has been successful. And
Michigan has been doing their thing.
Well, do you know why? Do you know why you just said that?
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no. But the governor is part of it.
Yeah.
But the reason is they passed a ballot measure and they stopped gerrymandering. And as soon as they stopped gerrymandering, it went from a supermajority of conservatives in Michigan to a balance. Actually, the Democrats took over the Statehouse, and along with Gretchen Whitmer, and they just started passing all of the things that the people have been asking for the last 15 years. That's what happened.
I'm a fan of hers. If
it's that's what happened.
It was the people, but I mean,
but
I
that's
think
what
she's
happened.
Just a great...
Michigan, they stopped gerrymandering as soon as they stopped. Ohio is not Michigan. Michigan is an actual, what for many years was a blue state. Ohio has never been, Ohio has been a bellwether state, and it really has, goes back and forth between them. And so that's really all we're trying to, and that's the message that I always try to get out about this. I am not, I do have viewpoints. Some of them are probably spilled out here a little bit, but I will tell you, but this is not about trying to sway the state in one direction or the other. I want fairness. I want actual democracy.
Want an actual working democracy that works for the will of whoever is here.
Exactly. If my position is not the popular position, it's not the position that the people want, I will accept that as long as I know I can go out and keep fighting until it does become, until I convince through conversations like this and one-on-one conversations till I convince enough people to come to my side.
You want the opportunity to have a real chance and for other people to have the same thing.
And that's not what happens. So I think Governor DeWine wants to use, so there are a lot of models around the country. I think it's the Iowa model is what he's suggesting, but the debate there is the Iowa model versus the Michigan model. When it's all said and done, if there's still a disagreement on the maps, it goes back to the politicians to vote on it again in Iowa. So even though they have, it's not a commission, but they have some measures, but I think it's after 2 or 3 times, which again,
the point is to keep it out of the hands
of the politicians
who have vested
self-serving interests. Exactly. And so that's why this model is set up as it is. And I will tell you, opponents, to this, point to Michigan and say, well, look what happened in Michigan. All that happened in Michigan was that the will of the people was started to be reflected in the laws of the land. That's all that happened.
And that's how it should be.
That's how
if we're following, as you mentioned, the actual purpose of having a democracy in this country.
Absolutely.
So for people who are going out to vote, and we're encouraging folks to engage, but not shaming the people who don't want to. I have to always say that.
Yeah.
What should people be mindful of? Like, I know that some folks got kicked off.
Yeah, a couple of things. I'm going to say
not some folks, like over 100,000 people, almost 200,000 people by our friend Frank.
Yes, by our friend Frank LaRose. What a small man. What a small man.
Little Frankie kicked off almost 200,000 of your family members, loved ones, partners off of the voting rolls.
So he will claim, which is not true, because the evidence is in the opposite. And I will put my lawyer hat back on to if we want to start going down some logic and some factual evidence. A couple of weeks ago, it was first week of August. LaRose claims that he, first of all, to be very clear, it's the hypocrisy and the just blatant lies are so clear because this state has went for Trump in, I don't know, what the numbers were in 2020 and 2016. So there is no way that the current conservative Republicans can say that this state had any issues whatsoever with the integrity of the election. In fact, Frank LaRose, if you ask him, and you can go pull up, it's like he forgets, like they think they grew up they think he's in the 70s and where you can say something and people won't be able to find it. But there's actual videotape of him saying that our elections were as efficient and effective and clean and as possible. And yet, here we are with continuing to do. So what he says, these purges are necessary to clean up the rolls. And I think the most recent example, he says, now imagine in a state of almost, somewhere around 12 million people, he says 100 non-citizens voted, not 100,000, not
an insignificant number, even if it's true at all.
Wouldn't change anything. But his statement is that this is because, there are dead people on the rolls, and there are people. What happens is it is just about people, lifing. People move. I move. I've moved 4 times in Columbus. People move all the time, and when they do, sometimes, like me, that doesn't happen. Updating their voter registration is the last thing they're thinking about. So, couple of weeks ago, 160,000 people kicked off. The last time he did this in 2020, the legal women voters, so you don't have to take my word for it, the legal women voters determined not only were it was something akin to almost something like I think it was 1,600 people, it was almost 2,000 people of the people who were kicked off incorrectly, meaning they should not have been kicked off the rolls.
And that is a significant.
Wait, it gets even better. And of those in Franklin County, 1,100 of them were in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Now, tell me, Secretary LaRose, how is it that 1,100 Black people get kicked off rolls, but not people, in
my show,
Dublin
Frankie now.
or somewhere else? And that becomes...
It's purposeful, right?
Absolutely, it's purposeful. So here's the question. So 2 things. Right now, this is the time. So the deadline to register to vote in the November 5th, 2024 election is October 7th. October 7th is the last day that you have to register to vote. So right now, today, I wish I had I have QR codes all over the place.
We will make sure
But even if you don't go to the Secretary of State's website, that's where you can check. And so as I am going out get out the vote and doing this stuff, I'm no longer asking people, are you registered to vote? Because as you know, everybody's out there.
That QR code.
People always, I get it. And I don't mind being annoying when it comes to this. And I know I can be, and I'm okay with that. But people their knee-jerk reaction is to say, yes, I'm registered. So don't ask that question. And I am encouraging everybody. I'm encouraging you. Talk to even the people in your house, the people at your church, the people in your fraternity, your sorority, all those things. Everybody needs to check their voter registration right now. Because here's the deal. If you are kicked off the rolls, you don't know you've been kicked off the rolls. They don't send you a notice. They don't send you an email. They don't say, hey, here's a warning, you're being kicked off the rolls. They just kick you off the rolls.
Who made the decision to not notify people?
That would be your friend.
Frank.
That would be Little
Frankie.
So when people learn that they've been kicked off the rolls is when they show up on election day to vote. Which then it's too late.
It's too late.
There's no way to register then. There's nothing. So my question
check your voter registration now.
My question to everyone now is not, are you registered to vote? It's when was the last time you checked your voter registration?
Yeah.
That's a much more important question. And they say, well, not. So you can do it. It literally takes like a minute and a half, less than 2 minutes to go onto the site, put your name in, put your address in, and either it pops up showing that you are registered or it doesn't.
And then you can register, but it has to be before October 7th.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so that's really what folks should be looking at. The other thing is because of our supermajority, they have changed. We now have, I think, what is considered the strictest voter photo ID law in the country. Ohio does. And so they removed, this is why I get angry about this, because this is insidious and it's a plan. It is a plan to get rid of people who don't agree with people like Little Frank. If you don't agree with him,
Frankie,
then they don't want you to participate in democracy. Their goal is to excise you from the whole process.
Right.
And so the question becomes, if you, there used to be, you could show up at on election day, you could bring a utility bill, you could use a military ID. It's been a long time, but you used to be able to use a student ID. You could use your photo ID even if it was expired. All of that has changed. You cannot use a utility bill. You can still use a military ID, but you cannot use other picture forms of ID. It's got to be a state driver's license or a state issued ID. Now, that's again suppressive because there are many folks who are brown and black who don't have vehicles, so they don't have driver's license. It's not just it's not brown. It's not just brown and black people, rural people, poor people. It is all the people who they don't want to participate in the process. So now you have to have a state issued ID. You can't use a military ID. And I'm trying to think what else. I think that's really it. Every other form, pretty much every other. If your ID is expired, you are not allowed. Right. So those are all, again, just unnecessary barriers to participating in self-governance, which is the whole thing that we're supposed to do. Exactly.
Right. That suppress already marginalized. Groups of people.
Exactly. So that's the thing. Check your voter registration right now. It takes 2 minutes. Go to the Secretary of State's website, voter registration, put your address, your name and address in. You will either show up or you won't. It will say there is no record if you're not there, or if it comes up, it'll have a link with your name and you can click on it and it'll give you your polling place and, all of that, I'll give you a sample ballot, all of that information. So you'll know immediately. It's not like it's a cumbersome process. So do that. And then also make sure you have the necessary ID. Now, one other thing, and it's a little bit complicated here, but I think it's important, because that's against federal law. They literally are breaking federal law because they were saying only a family member could help a person with disability. And that's not true. Anybody. I can help you. If you ask for me to help you, I can help you. You don't have to have that. So anyway, that's no longer in place.
But it's just an example of the links that
they are trying to go to eliminate to keep people from voting. So I want to check your voter registration, make sure you have the proper ID, and come up with a plan to vote. All I'm asking you right now, not, because I know how your household works. I need you to find one person who's not in your household, talk to them, make sure they're registered, and y'all go vote together. That's all I'm saying. You people say 5, 10, I don't believe. Just take one other person with you. Make sure that y'all go together. Here's the other thing. There's absentee voting. That's really important too. So if you want to vote using an absentee ballot, you don't need those IDs. You don't need a form of ID. That's one way to get around that if you need to get around it.
Right.
But here it is. It's a very cumbersome process. It's not complicated, it's just cumbersome. But you have to go and ask, either at the Board of Election or online, you have to request an absentee ballot. Once you make that request, the state will then mail you that ballot. You complete the ballot, and then you have to put it back in the mail, back to the Board of Elections, or you can go drop it off in person. But that's one way that you do it. And the only thing it asks for, I think, is I think it just asks for your Social Security number, or the last 4 of your Social Security number, or something like that. But you don't need a photo ID. That's right. They tried that too.
So there is a way around it, but it has lots of steps.
It's got lots of steps.
Again, creates barriers for people who may not have transportation or other things.
So if you use the absentee ballot, here's the real key thing about this. So on the Secretary of State's webpage, it says the last day that you are allowed to make that request for an absentee ballot is October 29th. And I'm just going to say this, U.S. mail system.
Don't wait till
then. Do you really believe that you can ask for an absentee ballot that's got to be mailed to you on October 29th, that's going to get to you before November 5th, a week later, and then get it back to them? It's got to be postmarked no later, I think, than the day before the election. So the election's on November 5th, so November 4th.
So if you know that you need to vote absentee,
I'm saying October 22nd would be, that's a legitimate enough amount of time for you to make the request to get it. Now, you may not, I wouldn't, and a lot of people don't want to, I wouldn't trust putting it back in the mail because they will count it, even if it shows up, if it's an absentee ballot has to be postmarked by Election Day.
Right.
So even if they don't get it, I think it's 48 hours after. I might be wrong about this, so don't quote me on that, but I think it's 48 hours after the election. So they do give some allowance for you. It's postmarked on November 5th, even if it didn't reach the Board of Elections, and your ballot will still be counted. But one way to eliminate that, which is what I would do, if you want to absentee vote using an absentee ballot, I do think that's a legitimate way to do it. Mm-hmm. You make the request for that. And then once you get it, if you can find a way, you can go drop it off yourself at the one ballot box that is available in Franklin County. And that's a whole different story. Again, your buddy Frank decided to, during COVID, because there were multiple places, that was making voting just a bit too easy for the people we don't want to vote. Right. So they cut it down in Franklin County. We have one place on Morse Road that you can go. Right. That's one place in the all of Franklin County. That's it's all of the suburbs, it's Reynoldsburg and Dublin, all those places. And then in some rural places, that doesn't, you're talking about, 400 or 500 people in Franklin County, the most populous county in the state. Mm-hmm. You are talking thousands of people who have to all find their way over there. But if you do this absentee ballot, you can do that. Once you get it, fill it out, and then take it.
Drop it off in person.
If you're able to. But if you can't do that, you can make sure you put enough postage on it, because if it gets, kicked because of postage, that it's not going to count. Right. The idea is, when I say make a plan to vote, that's really where I am. Figure it out. Will you be out of town? Maybe you won't want. And I will say this too: early voting starts October 8th. So the last day to register to vote is October 7th. The first day to vote early in person, October 8th. And so I can give you some of that. They changed the rules on that. We used to be able to go, it was, all day, every day, and the weekend. They were trying, the ACLU had to sue to make sure that the souls to the poll that Sunday remained. They tried to get rid of that as well, because they know, African-American people and Black churches and whatever had a big soul split. So they eliminated early voting on Sunday. They did bring that back. So that Sunday is there. But this is key too. There is no early voting the Monday before the election. So the election is on Tuesday, November 5th. There's no early voting on that Monday. So if you don't get your early vote in that Sunday, you have to show up Tuesday in person on Tuesday. And the lines are likely to be very, very long. So plan.
Well, yeah,
that's what
I think people are energized now and excited to support their candidate. So, we're going to continue to be pushing, all the information out so that people have it. And I just appreciate, how thorough you have been and always are. I mean, the voter guide, people use those voter guides from a couple of years ago. Do you remember that event that we did? People took that with them. Yeah. And I just think that's really powerful. So I just appreciate your service, because it's not thankless work. The thanks is when we have people able to participate in their own self-determination.
Sure, right? Exactly. And that's really what it is. Thank you. I appreciate you always providing the opportunity and the platform to have these discussions, because it's way more, as you have, even with you, I'm sure we've gone way over whatever amount of time you wanted. I'm sorry for your editor, but these aren't conversations that you can have standing on the corner that are quick, because there's no real quick explanation.
And it can be complicated.
I can give you a quick explanation, but it won't make sense and you won't understand. My goal is always to inform people. I don't want you in this capacity. I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to make your own informed decision. I want you to research, it doesn't take, we have now, because of technology, Google, when if we go to the Secretary of State's website, you can get a sample ballot. for your zip code. That's one thing you can do when you're checking your voter registration. You'll get a sample ballot. Go through. There's nothing that says
the Dispatch also publishes one every year that you can go through and learn about people.
Look at those people
and their records.
Exact. Google them. You know, see what their record is.
I mean,
see
I agree with you. It's like, don't take our word for it. We're just giving you the information ahead of time. And then it becomes, and also just, you know, being a place where some of these candidates can come and people can get to really like get a sense of who they are outside of those little, you know, blurbs in the newspaper or the 2 seconds on the news, right? This is where you can really get a sense and a feel of the vibes.
I want people to be engaged
in the policies,
and I want them to understand what they're voting, because that's the one thing you hear a lot of. Everyone is always saying, "Go vote, go vote, go vote." But a couple of years ago, Malcolm and I, we did this. We had his lit brunch. It was, you know, we had people, and I think you may have been there. It was there was a young, I'll never forget this young mother she was in her mid-20s. She had a young kid, and she was like, "I'm here because I want to be engaged, but I just don't know. I don't know who to vote for. I don't know what to bet." And I don't want people. I have a lot of opinions, but I don't want you to take something as important as, you know, you and I, as much as we agree on, we may disagree on something that's significant enough that you will say, I'm not going to vote for that candidate that you are going to vote for. And that's fine. I want people to be engaged and to be able to, like you say, self-determination, what democracy is about. Be engaged and understand what's going on, and understand that just because it is simplistic, if you learn the way you learned it in school, how, you know, a bill becomes law and all those things,
it
doesn't work like that.
And it doesn't teach you how politicking. It doesn't teach you how that works.
Right. When you have people like
it just teach you like if you do A, then B happens, and that's just
not the way it happens.
Right.
When you have people who are actively working against you, then it doesn't work that way. And so then you have to know. So check your voter registration, make a voting plan, understand the issues, especially on this particular ballot, gerrymandering and the Supreme Court races. If we lose the Supreme Court, it won't matter that we get this new voting commission, this gerrymandering voting commission or not, because they will, and I don't have faith. I don't have faith that they will, because their history shows that they will be partisan. They did it. They did everything they could to keep it from happening before, because they realize if we have an actual fair map that incorporates everybody, all of a sudden the politicians have to start engaging again. They don't just get to show up in a primary and win. They actually have to convince people to vote. And all of a sudden we have our democracy back in Ohio. We're able to say, no, these are the things we want and these are the things we don't want. And the politicians have to listen to us, rather than the politicians saying, this is my view and you will live under my view. This is the way I want you to live. In The Handmaid's Tale or whatever, whatever is going on. So well, thank you, Tareya. I do appreciate it.
I appreciate you. You know, you're always welcome to come up here, because I do appreciate how willing you are to share, and how thorough you are with speaking to people, and just thank you for your work, and on to November.
I appreciate you. Go vote.